Picture this. You're driving through a quiet San Diego neighborhood when suddenly a massive military tank comes barreling down the street, crushing cars like tin cans and tearing through everything in its path. Sounds like something out of a movie, right? Well, on May 17th, 1995, this nightmare became reality for thousands of San Diego residents. And the man behind the wheel wasn't some foreign invader or terrorist. He was a local plumber named Shawn Nelson, whose life had spiraled so far out of control that stealing a 57-ton war machine seemed like his only option. What drove an ordinary American veteran to commit one of the most bizarre crimes in modern history? The answer lies in a tragic downward spiral that nobody saw coming. Shawn Timothy Nelson wasn't always the man who would terrorize San Diego. Born in 1959, he grew up in the Claremont neighborhood, the same streets he would later tear apart with a tank. After high school, Shawn did what many young men of his generation did. He enlisted in the Army. At Fort Knox, he learned to operate the most powerful machines the military had to offer, battle tanks. He was stationed in Germany as a tank commander, living what seemed like a decent life in the service. But by 1980, just 2 years into his military career, everything changed. The Army discharged him for what they called multifaceted disciplinary problems. Nobody talks about what exactly happened, but whatever it was serious enough to end his military dreams. Back in San Diego, Shawn tried to rebuild. He became a plumber and was actually good at it. Really good. By 1984, he'd married a woman named Susie Hellman, and for a while, things looked promising. They owned a home, his plumbing business was thriving, and Susie worked as a legal secretary. It was the American dream in action, but that dream was about to become a nightmare. The first crack in Shawn's life came in 1988 when his mother Betty died. Then in 1990, a motorcycle accident left him with severe neck and back injuries that would plague him for the rest of his life. The constant pain was unbearable, and that's when Shawn started turning to substances to cope. First alcohol, then something much more dangerous, methamphetamine. The drug didn't just numb his physical pain, it completely rewired his brain. His behavior became erratic and violent. Susie watched the man she married transform into someone she didn't recognize. By 1991, she couldn't take it anymore and filed for divorce. The following year, 1992, Shawn lost his father, Fred, to illness. In just 4 years, he'd lost his parents, his wife, and his health. But the meth was doing something even more sinister to Shawn's mind. It was convincing him that he was about to strike it rich in the most unlikely place imaginable, his own backyard. This is where Shawn's story takes a turn into complete madness. Somewhere in his drug-addled mind, he became convinced that there was gold buried beneath his modest San Diego home. Not just a little gold, he believed he was sitting on a fortune that would solve all his problems. So he did what any rational person would do, right? He grabbed a shovel and started digging and digging and digging some more. What started as a small hole quickly became an obsession. Shawn dug deeper and deeper until he'd carved out a mine shaft that was 17 to 18 feet deep, so deep that visitors needed a ladder to get out. He installed generators in his basement to power his operation and even converted his jacuzzi into a sluice for gold panning. His backyard became a moonscape of dirt mounds and mining equipment. The neighbors were terrified, but Shawn was convinced he'd found something incredible. The really crazy part? This wasn't just Shawn's private delusion. Other meth users in the area started showing up at his house, and together they'd head down the mine to dig for treasure. It became a twisted community project where addicts and parolees would gather to feed each other's fantasies. Shawn was so convinced of his discovery that he actually filed mineral rights claims with the city, demanding legal ownership of what he believed was his underground gold mine. When the city denied his claims, it was just another blow to his already fragile mental state. Friends and family watched this bizarre behavior with growing alarm, but the meth had Shawn completely convinced that he was about to become the richest man in San Diego. Reality, however, had other plans. By 1995, Shawn's world was collapsing faster than his homemade mine shaft. His plumbing business, once successful, was in ruins. The combination of his physical injuries and drug addiction made it nearly impossible to work. Then in June 1994, someone stole his work van along with all his plumbing tools, essentially destroying any chance he had of earning a living. Without income, the bills started piling up like the dirt in his backyard. First, The electricity was cut off, then the water. Soon, Shawn was living in a dark, cold house with no utilities, surviving on whatever substances he could get his hands on. The bank began foreclosure proceedings on his home, the same home where he'd been digging for non-existent gold. As if things couldn't get worse, in April 1995, his live-in girlfriend died of a drug overdose right there in his house. The woman he'd been sharing his delusions with was gone, leaving him completely alone with his paranoia and addiction. By May 1995, Shawn Nelson had lost everything: his health, his family, his business, his home, and his girlfriend. He was facing homelessness, bankruptcy, and the crushing realization that there was no gold in his backyard, just a giant hole that symbolized how empty his life had become. For most people, this would be rock bottom. For Shawn, it was the moment he decided to make everyone pay. On May 17th, 1995, at around 6:30 p.m., something snapped inside Shawn Nelson's drug-ravaged mind. He'd spent months feeling powerless as his life crumbled around him, but suddenly he remembered something from his army days, something that could make him feel powerful again. He knew exactly where the California National Guard kept their tanks, and he knew exactly how to operate them. Shawn drove his Chevrolet van to the National Guard armory in Kearney Mesa, expecting to find locked gates and armed guards. Instead, he found something unbelievable. The gates were wide open. Personnel were working late, and in their rush, they'd left the facility completely unsecured. For a man planning the crime of the century, it was like winning the lottery. Shirtless, disheveled, and high on meth, Shawn walked onto the military compound like he owned the place. There were guards around, but incredibly, none of them seemed to notice or care about the obviously disturbed man wandering around their secure facility. Shawn made his way to where the tanks were parked. 10 massive M60A3 Patton tanks, each weighing over 57 tons and capable of crushing anything in their path. The first tank wouldn't start. Neither would the second. But when Shawn climbed into the third tank and hit the ignition, the massive diesel engine roared to life. At that moment, a guard finally spotted him and casually said, "Hi." Shawn, still shirtless and clearly out of his mind, simply replied, "Hi," back. That was it. No questions, no attempts to stop him, no alarm raised. The guard just walked away, leaving Shawn alone with a fully operational battle tank. What happened next would be burned into the memory of everyone in San Diego forever. At 6:45 p.m., Shawn Nelson crashed through the armory's fence in a 57-ton M60A3 tank and began the most surreal crime spree in American history. For the next 23 minutes, he would turn the quiet streets of San Diego into a war zone, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do to stop him. The sight was absolutely incredible and terrifying. Here was this massive military vehicle designed to destroy enemy positions in combat, slowly rolling through suburban neighborhoods and methodically crushing everything in its path. Shawn wasn't driving randomly. Witnesses said his destruction seemed intentional and calculated. He'd deliberately target parked cars, flattening them down to just 2.5 feet tall. He smashed through traffic lights, dragging the poles behind him like trophies. Fire hydrants exploded in massive geysers as the tank rolled over them, cutting off water to thousands of residents. Police cars swarmed the scene, but what were they supposed to do? Their squad cars looked like toys next to this military monster. They followed helplessly as Shawn crushed over 40 vehicles, destroyed utility poles, knocked down traffic signals, and left 5,100 households without power. The most shocking part? Despite all this chaos and destruction, Shawn managed to complete his rampage without injuring a single person. It was as if he wanted to destroy the city's infrastructure but didn't want to become a mass murderer. News helicopters captured every moment of the chase, broadcasting live footage that seemed impossible to believe. Here was an American veteran high on meth and driving a tank through the streets like some post-apocalyptic movie. Shawn even stuck his head out of the tank's hatch, smiling and waving at the cameras as if he was finally getting the attention he'd been craving his whole life. For 23 minutes, Shawn Nelson was the most powerful man in San Diego. After years of feeling helpless and forgotten, he was finally in control of something that nobody could stop. But like everything else in his life, this moment of power was about to come to a tragic end. The rampage might have continued indefinitely, but Shawn made a crucial mistake. He decided to take his tank onto State Route 163, perhaps trying to escape to another city, or simply wanting to see how far he could push this insane situation. The highway chase looked like something out of a movie. Dozens of police cars trailing behind a tank that was moving at maybe 30 miles per hour, completely helpless to intervene. But tanks, as powerful as they are, weren't designed for high-speed highway maneuvers. As Shawn tried to navigate the roadway, he lost control and slammed into a concrete median barrier. The impact was devastating. Not only did it stop the tank dead in its tracks, but it also knocked off one of the tank's treads, leaving the massive vehicle stranded and tilted at a dangerous angle. This was the moment police had been waiting for. Within seconds, officers swarmed the disabled tank. Using bolt cutters, they broke open the hatch that Shawn had locked from the inside. But even cornered and trapped, Shawn wasn't ready to give up. He started the engine and began rocking the tank back and forth, trying to knock the officers off and somehow get the disabled vehicle moving again. Police shouted for him to surrender, but Shawn had come too far to quit now. In his final act of defiance, he continued trying to operate the tank's controls, perhaps hoping for one last moment of the power that had made him feel alive again. That's when Officer Rick Piner made a split-second decision that would end the most bizarre crime in San Diego history. He fired a single shot. Shawn Timothy Nelson, the unemployed plumber who had terrorized an entire city with a stolen tank, was dead at age 35. The 23-minute rampage that had captivated the nation was over, leaving behind a trail of destruction, unanswered questions, and one of the most unbelievable true crime stories ever recorded. In the end, Shawn's brother Scott said it best. The man who died yesterday was only a shell of the person we loved. The real Shawn died 2 years ago at the hands of drugs and alcohol. What started as an American success story, a veteran who came home to build a life as a small business owner, had devolved into a cautionary tale about addiction, mental health, and what happens when someone loses everything and decides to take the whole world down with them. The tank rampage lasted just 23 minutes, but it revealed something disturbing about how quickly an ordinary person can become capable of extraordinary destruction when they have nothing left to lose.